Imagine teaching an entire lesson, but realizing at the end that your students focus on the wrong skills. This happens when objectives are unclear, incomplete, or missing. Today, we will explore how clear and well-designed learning objectives guide both the teacher and the learners toward meaningful success. I am Vicent Rojas from BSED English 2A. In this presentation, I will be discussing the guiding principles in determining and formulating learning objectives and the three domains of learning. So guiding principles in determining and formulating learning objectives. So to begin with, our first principle is begin with the end in mind. So lessons must begin with clearly defined objectives, as this ensures we don't waste time and we know exactly what we want learners to achieve at the end of the lesson or the session. So as we all know that learning objectives are considered as the compass of the learners. So for instance, our objectives would be by the end of the lesson, students will be able to explain the water cycle. So in this example, this determines the direction of the entire lesson. So the lesson should be organized and clearly defined objectives as we want to measure something, most importantly, the goals that we want to achieve at the end of the lesson. After understanding the importance of starting with a clear goals, the next principle focuses on communicating these goals. Second principle is to share lesson objectives with students. When students know their targets, they become more self-motivated and goal-directed. This means that learners can track progress and stay more focused when goals are clearly visible and understandable. So for instance, at the start of the class, the teacher says, "Today, we will compare chemical and physical changes." So at this point, they know what the teacher's targets are, the expected outcomes at the end of the lesson. Once students know the goals, we then ensure that these objectives address multiple aspects of learning. Third principle is objectives must cover 2 or 3 domains in learning. So objectives should include cognitive, psychomotor, and or affective areas for holistic learning. So this means that we ensures that students not only gain knowledge but also skills and values. For instance, in cognitive, we can say explain how photosynthesis occurs. In psychomotor, we can say create a simple plant experiment setup. And of course, in affective, we can say to show appreciation for plant conservation. So as you can see here, we have 3 cognitive domain of learning. We have the cognitive, psychomotor, and affective. Following that, we should also make sure that these objectives are meaningful and relevant. So this we have our fourth principle, to choose significant and relevant objectives. So objectives must be meaningful, so learners become self-directed. This means that students learn better when content relates to real-life application. So for example, teaching first aid basics during health class because it applies to real emergency situations. The fifth principle is objectives must align with the aims of education in the Philippine Constitution. So objectives should reflect the national educational aims and institutional mission statements. This ensures that classroom goals contribute to producing responsible and productive citizens. Example, we have to show respect for cultural diversity, which supports nation-building values. Our sixth principle is to develop critical and creative thinking. This means that objectives should include questions requiring convergent and divergent thinking. So when we say this should build problem-solving skills, reasoning skills, and innovation skills. For example, in convergent, we can ask, what is the correct formula for this area? In divergent, we can say, design your own solution to reduce plastic waste. So this means that it requires not only problem-solving skills, but also reasoning and innovation skills that the students should develop. And to ensure that these objectives are usable and measurable, we should apply the SMART principle as we build and as it boils down to our seventh principle. This is the objectives must be SMART. Objectives must be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bounded. This means that SMART objectives make it easier for teachers to assess learning accurately with relevant over time. So for instance, our objectives would be within the 20 minutes, students will be able to classify 12 pictures of animals into vertebrates and invertebrates with 85% accuracy. So at these examples, we can clearly see that this applies the SMART principle. This is objectives, achievable, measurable, and of course time-bounded. Now that we have completed the guiding principles, let us proceed to the major categories of objectives. These are the three domains of learning. The three domains of learning. So first is the knowledge objectives, or what we call the cognitive domain. So this domain involves understanding, remembering, and thinking. So it forms the foundation for processing information and building concepts. So for instance, is to list the different parts of the digestive system. After addressing knowledge, we now move to the development of physical and performance skills. This refers to the skill objectives, or what we call the psychomotor domain. So this domain focuses on physical skills and coordination. So the learners must apply knowledge through hands-on performance. As what John Dewey, a pragmatist, says, learning by doing. So this can apply to real-life challenges and application. So example, to accurately measure 50 millimeter of water using a graduated cylinder. And finally, beyond skills, learning must also shape the attitudes and values. This is the additional objectives or affective domain. So this domain involves the feelings, the values, and the attitudes of the students. So education should also develop character, not just knowledge, not just skills, but rather the values and the character that they should uphold. So for example, we can say to our objectives, to demonstrate willingness to work cooperatively during group activities. And with the domains now fully explained, we can conclude the discussion. To sum it up, let us all be reminded that learning objectives are the backbone of effective instruction. With clear objectives, teaching becomes intentional and learning becomes transformational. Once again, this is Vicent Rojas. Thank you for listening and thank you for watching.
Good day, teaching everyone. My name is JEYLENE APOLINARIO, and you can call me Teacher J. Now, we will talk about the guidelines for writing effective learning objectives as well as the tips for improving learning objectives. The first guidelines for writing effective learning objectives is behavior, the part of the objective that states what the students will do. Behavior must be observable and measurable. It tells the exact action students must perform after learning. If the action cannot be seen, example, understand and appreciate, then it cannot be assessed. Behavior must use measurable verbs like identify, write, solve, classify, and create. Example, students will list the steps of the scientific method. Behavior is the list. The teacher can check the student's written list. The action is clear, visible, and measurable. The second one is student-centered. Objectives should focus on what the student, not the teacher, will achieve. Student-centered objectives begin with the student's will because learning focuses on the learner's performance. This helps avoid teacher-focused statements Like the teacher will explain which students show learning outcomes. It ensures the objective measures what students can do, what the teacher does. Number 3, the conditions. The tools, resources, or situation provided to help students perform the task. Conditions clarify what students will be given while doing the objective. It might include diagrams, calculator, text, videos, or group settings. It sets expectation so students know the context and teachers know what materials to prepare. Example, given a graphic organizer, students will summarize the story. Condition, given a graphic organizer, shows the support tool provided student perform the behavior summarized using the graphic organizer. The last one is the standards. How well students must perform the behavior to show mastery. Standards express the expected level of performance accuracy, number correct, quality indicators, or time limits. This makes the objective measurable and helps determine if student met the expected learning outcome. Example, students will identify the parts of a plan with 90% accuracy. Standard 90% accuracy show how good the performance should be. The teacher can easily measure if students reach the goal. Now let's move on to the tips for improving learning objectives. Number 1, use a measurable action verb plus define content. Every objective must include a measurable action and a clear topic. The verb must show observable performance. Example, classify, compare, and write. The content should show exactly what the student will learn. Together, they prevent vague objectives. Examples, the students will compare mammals and reptiles. Measurable verb, compare. The content, mammals versus reptiles. Outcome is accessible and specific. Number 2, keep objectives short and focus on one outcome. Each objective must address only one skill. Combining multiple outcomes make objective confusing and difficult to assess. A clear single outcome ensures focus and easier evaluation. Good example, students will solve linear equations. One skill only, direct and easy to measure. For example, students will solve equation and write an essay about them. Two different skills, not focused. Number 3, avoid vague or not measurable verb. Do not use verbs that cannot be assessed directly. Words like understand, learn, or appreciate do not show specific actions. You cannot see understanding, but you can see the action that show understanding, like explaining or demonstrating. Bad examples, students will understand multiplication. Better example, students will solve multiplication problems. Solve is measurable. Understand is not measurable. Number 4, make objectives student-focused. The objective must begin with the student's will. Objectives describes what learners will achieve, not what teachers will do. These help teachers design activities aligned with learning results. Example, the students will identify supporting details in a paragraph. Starts with student shows student performance, not teacher actions. Number 5, make objectives smart. Objectives must be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Smart objectives are clear, easier to assess, and more meaningful. They specify what students do, how well, and by when. Example, by the end of the lesson, students will solve 8 out of 10 addition problems within 10 minutes. Specific, solve addition problems, measurable, 8 out of 10, achievable, and realistic, appropriate for level, time-bound within 10 minutes. Number 6, include higher order thinking when appropriate. Use higher level verbs when lessons require a deep thinking. Not all objectives should be about remembering facts. Some lessons need analysis, judgment, or creativity. Using higher order verbs helps build critical thinking skills. Example, students will evaluate the credibility of online sources. Evaluate requires judgment, encourages deeper thinking, suitable for advanced learning outcomes. Number 7, use objective as basis for lesson planning. And this is our last tips. Objectives guide what you teach, how you teach, and how you assess. A clear objective helps you choose appropriate activities, materials, and assessments. Everything in the lesson must connect to the objective to ensure alignment. If the objective is students will write a persuasive paragraph, then the teacher must teach persuasive techniques, show examples, let students practice writing, and evaluate using a rubrics. Everything in the lesson supports the objective, making learning intentional and focused. So that would be all for my discussion, and I hope you've learned something from this. Thank you!